welcoming now Aron and Michael of Eremite Games, two co-founders, studio behind the roguelike city builder Against the Storm. So do some proper introductions here. Aron is a co-founder and is the producer of Against the Storm. His previous work on Dying Light 2 and Dying Light Bad Blood taught him how to create scalable products which benefit the early access growth of Against the Storm. When not making games, he's playing with his puppies, Hector and Proshek, and relentlessly trying to convince Michael that Gothic is a better game than Morrowind, which I had to include just for the hot take. And Michael, another co-founder of Eremite Games and the lead developer and designer of Against the Storm, he puts his past experiences working on live service games into practice by releasing new Against the Storm content updates every 2 weeks, which is very fast. So,
thank you for having us tonight. Hello from across the Atlantic.
Hello. Yes, it's always wonderful when we can get people from a little further away than the usual San Francisco locale. So thank you for working with our time zones.
It's been fun. Hi. We've played some games before hopping on the stream, so we had a long night.
Excellent. Well, yeah, like to get into it, I think that maybe actually, hopefully people have played Against the Storm, but if not, if you want to maybe talk a little bit about it, and especially I think the most interesting thing to us is that roguelite city builder connection and how you got to that combination, which I think is an interesting one and one that works extremely well. I've played a lot of Against the Storm in the last week, I'll tell you that.
So maybe Aron can kick off and talk a bit about Against the Storm itself, and I can continue with the roguelike elements.
Yeah, let's go with that. So for those of you who haven't played Against the Storm, it's a game of that takes the city builder core of all the mechanics of all the player actions basically, and spices them up with roguelike elements. So when we designed Against the Storm from the beginning, we tried to like distill the essence of a city builder of the beginning 1 to 2 hours of a gameplay loop in a city builder, and add replayability to it. So we focused mostly on the replayability side, on the generation side of roguelites, and we took those elements, implemented them into the game. The game is out from on Steam right now. It's been almost 2 years of early access, bi-weekly updates, a lot of player feedback there. And so the game is evolving still. That's being a roguelite is very helpful in that, because we change the balance here and there. The game is heavily reliant on RNG, of course. So tuning that and giving players new content results in basically a lot of replayability. One of the main, I think, draws to the game is we have like a perk system. We have blueprints for buildings which are generated, so you never play the same hand. You have something of a random, pseudo-random hand you're dealt, and you have to find ways of playing with it, basically. And the game is like cut in some smaller like sessions where you build a city for 2 hours, then you move on to the world map where you find another way to settle somewhere, and you start this loop again. Of course, the game is progressively getting harder the more you play, and there's also the roguelite element comes into play. So that's why we call it roguelite, because we have some permanent progression there you can buy in the smoldering city, so the main city of the big of the game, basically. I don't know if you, Michael, want to add something to the roguelike element here.
Sure. So I think you heard this discussion like many times, but just to be sure, for us, like when we thought about it initially, the roguelite is more of a RPG elements. It's the same basically. So you can have Ubisoft game with RPG elements. You can have a farming game with RPG elements. So we thought we could capture the same feeling with roguelite. So we've built a very simple prototype of a simple city builder, and then we thought, okay, if a roguelite is just like an element of RPG, how does it manifest? What does it mean for a game to be a roguelite? Like what do we need? So we identified few elements. For example, the most important for us was the power fantasy. I'm sorry, ultimate power fantasy. This ability that is purely found in roguelite and roguelikes, that you can, like, you play to find this one magical build one time out of 20 and absolutely break the game. And in any other genre, it would be unacceptable. It would be bad balance. It would be boring and one strategy to just play. But in this one magical genre, it's actually what we do. So that was one of the elements, the decisions and the meaningful repercussions of those decisions was very important to us, and also the cycle. The roguelites have very unique bits about them. You can play them for 2 hours and leave them, return after 2 weeks, play 8 hours, like 4 rounds or whatever, and then leave the game for another month. And we really enjoyed that, and we thought it's a great thing to find way into city builder genre, which is great. We love it, but we thought that it can breathe a bit life to the genre that is getting a bit stalled, maybe. And it was much easier to think that way, that hey, those are the elements, those are like flavors, and let's put it into a city builder.
Yeah, that's really interesting in the way that with roguelites you can push, what a really good combination looks like and also what a really bad combination looks like. Because worst case, you're going to fail that run, but like there'll be another one right after, which, yeah, that's interesting in comparison to, I like how especially I find that the beginning of a game of a city builder, often you end up with kind of a pattern that you do every single time because that's kind of optimal.
True.
But there's so many initial conditions that change in Against the Storm because of those roguelite elements that will make you, push what you do, and you have to kind of like re-strategize every time.
To be honest, that was the largest challenge, and that is something that we still a bit struggle with. Like almost every change we implement to the game was measured in a way. Does it help replayability? Does it make run differ between each other? And if the feature didn't make the game different, even if it was fantastic, in most cases we didn't go for it, and we thought very hard about what could make players play differently, basically. Because that's something that, as you mentioned, it's not it's quite unique in city builder genre.
Yeah, were there any examples where you found something that, seemed like a good idea, but then didn't help with that replayability? Like how do you test that? Do you just think through, or is that one where, the speed of your updates helps of kind of seeing how the community plays with the new update? Do you ever take things out if it's not impacting replayability like you'd hoped?
To be honest, there are like multiple steps. The first one is, the designer and his head. And to be honest, there are many ideas that we as designers think are great, but then when we sleep with it and look at the screen on another day, we can clearly see it's a bad idea. The second filter is the team itself. Like we are really believing in the democratized process, if I can say that. Like we all decide if the feature is worth it or not, and there are multiple occasions. For example, I can give an example from, I don't know, like last month, that I thought about a great system like cities having walls, because walls look fantastic and they would breathe a lot of life to the game. But on the very first stage, I almost like, I don't think that will make, like in every game players will feel obliged to do it, and every town will look the same, and there will be just another action that you have to complete in every game. And to be honest, that was enough, like, because he was right. If we would add such an overwhelmingly impactful system to the game, it would be repeated in every game and would defeat the purpose. But also, as you said, the next filter is the players themselves. I don't think there are many occasions where we cut the feature entirely, but there are like multiple examples of features that we iterated like 3 or 4 times before we settled on a version that both we and the players enjoyed and thought it helped their playability. I don't know if Aron can think about some good example.
I'm not sure about an example, but I think that even if we focus very heavily on creating replayability and creating different experiences between different runs, we still have some small actions in the game or some points where it's unavoidable to an extent. Like in an action game, in a turn-based game, those actions are so small that you don't really notice them. In a city builder, your basic actions are a lot longer and their time span is longer. So for example, in our game, most sessions start with you build up some roads for your city, you build up a woodcutter's camp, you build up some gathering camps. So these are the basic actions that basically happen every time. Sometimes you do them in a different order, but most of the time they are still the same. So it's always a bit of that repeated action always there. But also, I think that when Michael was talking about the last filter, which are the players, basically, one very good tool we're using for filtering those repeatable and not so interesting mechanics is that we do an experimental branch a lot of the time for our game. So we do like bi-weekly updates, but when we have something controversial to add to the game, like something that might not really be, we are not sure ourselves if it's the best idea. We just give the most dedicated players access to a beta branch, basically, and they can test they can test the new feature and give us feedback. And we always ask like pointed questions in those beta stages. So we ask one of the most important questions there is always like, how does this feature or this change influence the gameplay overall? Is the gameplay more boring or repeatable, or is it more interesting? I can't think of any other like big features that we cut lately, because there's been a lot of features.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's I think that's all we can think of on that topic.
Yeah, and then it's interesting that element of getting information from the community. Travis asks, what kind of metrics do you collect? Do you get things like the average game time from players, like what difficulty they're on, like what kind of information have you found helpful to collect there?
Our background is actually like mobile games, so we are a bit skewed in that sense, and we really enjoy gathering, of course, anonymous analytics, like gameplay analytics, and going through it like basically every 2 weeks in some form. But of course, that's only a small part of the picture. Like, there are so many occasions in which the data is pointing into one direction. Even like the simplest examples, like having 30 perks and you look at the percentage of perks being picked. Even that is like looking just at the numbers. It can be very misleading because very often the most interesting and beloved perks are also the most situational, and they won't be picked that often, and they are completely fine, and we don't want to change them. But looking at the numbers themselves, you could say, oh, okay, here's the most boring perk ever made, and it's the most picked. We actually have this one. It's like 50% to woodcutting speed, and it's horrible, but we just can't convince the community that it's not, and just they're always in the top. So yeah, we gather a lot of analytics, but we don't go blindly into it. we really read the feedback on all the channels we can put our hands on. Maybe those days, nowadays we don't have that much time, and sometimes we miss a thing or two, but we really focus on that, and I think it's crucial for our like process. Aaron probably can summarize it better.
Yeah, I mean, with analytics, we have like the most basic ones for like the perks people choose, the buildings they choose, because this is also generated. The basic actions they take in a game, the events they encounter, how do they solve them. So these are like, as Michael said, on one hand, it's helping us create a good balanced background. So for example, because those spiky perks, as Michael said, are the most interesting ones, but they have to be juxtaposed to a like a background where stuff is relatively for this game balanced. So that helps us with that. There's also like the issue of scale a bit, because before you have a game released, it's hard to get feedback because nobody really cares about the game. When you have the game released now and people are playing it daily, then the feedback is almost overwhelming to a degree. And it's also, aside from just picking the right feedback from the analytics, we also monitor the like YouTube channels, Discord messages, Reddit, Steam forums, and so on. And it's also some like our duty is to basically read everything, but we also have to correctly filter it, because between the lines, between the feedback, there's a lot of feedback that is saying something else that is written. For example, people wanting some perks or some abilities or anything to be more powerful doesn't really mean that something is like not is too weak or is not really fun. Sometimes it's just because that's their favorite playstyle and they want to be like have even more power fantasy tied to it. So we have to be careful with that. I have this problem where I try to reactively change some stuff in the game because, you know, when there's player feedback, there has to be something wrong, but that's not always the case. So I think we slowed down with the feedback a bit because of the scale, but also because of the scale, the feedback and the sea of feedback, you can see the points more clearly because no, the best thing about, for example, balance is always if people talk about the balance thing from both sides and they argue, it's a good position to be in, because if they argue, then there's no clear answer, and that's a fun thing to witness, because, you know, talking about balance is something we as gamers enjoy.
Yes, that's a great point. And yeah, I mean, I've heard the advice before that, you know, when someone says they have a problem, usually that's always true. But when they say, and here's the solution, that's when, you know, you need to kind of take a minute and think about if that's actually the best solution.
Yeah, we also use like this, use a special site, for example, in early access called Upvote, where people can post like their feature requests, their balance requests, and so on. It's a very good tool to like collect upvotes for different like feature requests from players, but it's also a tool where you have to be careful with the solutions, as you said, because people offer a lot of solutions for things that they think that should change in the game, but a lot of the time the solutions are somewhere else. It's not that this perk, for example, is weak. It's maybe that this playstyle is not really well defined, and it should have more definition before we change the perks that are tied to it, and so on and so on. So it's always a bit of a guessing game, and also a bit of a reading between the lines.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
I like that you. Oh, go ahead.
No. It just I just wanted to add that maybe I'm a bit, or we are a bit freaked out about player feedback, but we always thought and talked about players have the full right, in our opinion, to write convoluted feedback, to write emotional feedback, to write just bluntly wrong feedback, to whatever. It's like it's not their job to give like perfect informed and design the very well thought feedback, because we really believe that that's something that the designer is responsible for. Like, we need to look at this sometimes emotional ranting, right? Especially in games like ours, when there's like the stakes can be high, right? It's like there is no loading back, and so people can get a bit emotional. They can rant a bit sometimes. I must admit, we have our community is great. It's not like League of Legends or something. I love LoL, but yeah, we all know it. But I think, and I truly believe that it's our job as designers to unpack it, to really get to the bottom of the feedback.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to ask, because I think, again, Aaron, you mentioned at one point the need to resist the urge to get too caught up in the feedback and kind of be reactive. Like, have you found any good techniques to help? Especially, there's sometimes that like emotional toll if you're hearing a lot of really emotionally charged feedback. How do you take that in a way that stops you from being too reactive, or just getting too stressed out, or like it's a lot of work. It can be very overwhelming, especially negative or emotional feedback.
Probably the best advice is waiting like 2 weeks. Really,
Just
because
time.
there are multiple occasions when people are like, "Oh, it's horrible, we're gonna kill you" or something. But after a week or two, people just get used to it, and not in a bad way, in like, "Oh yeah, it's horrible, but now I can live with that." More like, after they play with it a bit with it, they find a way to how to basically implement it into their playstyle, for example, right? To use this perk, to use this mechanic, to basically win with it, or just find a niche for it, right? And in many cases, that's the time is the factor we need.
Yeah, because of the time, we can judge if this change was influencing the playstyle in a good way, because we want to sometimes disrupt the player's playstyle a bit, especially if the game has such a long lifetime, or if it's just a bad design idea and then people universally hate it after like a week or two. I think the other tool that is very useful, it's not very useful for solo devs, but for a team it's very useful. We basically talk about it a lot. And for example, I am a bit more reactive, but Michael is a bit more level-headed. So we find common grounds there when it comes to addressing feedback. For example, Luke, our community manager, is very player-centered. So even if we have an urge to dismiss some piece of feedback, because I mean, not dismiss, but like say, okay, let's wait with that, it's gonna be fine in 2 days. We still have like this itch from the team to, okay, let's respond to that, let's take it into consideration, let's mix it in with the other feedback we have somewhere written down. So basically, being in a team of different individuals is helping with that, with coping with the feedback, especially with the emotional one. When somebody takes some emotional feedback too serious and too hard, then the rest can console them a bit.
That's great. Yeah, a benefit to being on a team. Another question. So you mentioned a couple of times the kind of longer cycle, which is something I found interesting too, is that a city builder, even with the way it's broken out into runs, kind of has like a longer feel to it often than a typical roguelite does. I'm curious how some of that came into it. And then even Travis asked a question about the Queen's Impatience bar as something that mechanically kind of at a certain point forces the player's speed, of you kind of got to end up, completing by a certain time. Was that kind of a thematic choice? Was that coming from mechanically needing a way to limit how long a run is? Like, how do you think about that kind of the time a run takes, especially when you bring in those roguelite elements, which are usually a little faster?
So I think very early in the project, we were thinking about how long the session could possibly be, and very quickly we came to the like hour and a half and 2 hours. So we were always designing the game to be so the runs would be that long, and every major positive change was always balanced by some negative ones that make the game shorter or longer. But the Queen's Impatience actually, it's quite for us it was very very important moment in the project, because at the beginning we've published a demo on Steam. It was, I don't know, like 3 years ago, basically 1 year into the production. The game was in a really rough state, I would say. It was like playable, people had fun with it, but it was very simplistic. And the Queen's Impatience was basically a timer. Like nowadays, it's more of a resource. You can stretch it, you can reduce it, you can increase it. There are some benefits to having it. But back in the days, it was like 30 minutes timer or 1 hour timer. And it's horrible. It's like one of the worst mechanics in a game. People should be upset about it. It's just all, we didn't have time to implement anything like more interesting. Because racing, city builder, when you race with time, it doesn't really sound that funny. But we've put like a very simple fantasy, like flavor, taste on it. It's a queen, and she's very angry, very impatient, and it just matches the expectations, right? You can see her. And I remember watching some, like one of the very first stream that someone posted on YouTube. And he was screaming at the scream like, "Queen, please!" He was like, "The bar is almost there." And she's like, "Oh no, she's so angry." And I knew it's like 24 minutes out of 25. It's like there is absolutely nothing there, like behind this like thin layer of fiction. But it was enough for players. It was enough, and I remember I was stunned by like how much one can achieve with just a thin layer of fiction that just matches the expectation, right? Because if that would be, I don't know, some
Oh, we lost Michael.
Oh, we lost Michael.
He's logging in
The
back in,
queen,
but
the queen
yeah,
was
the
like,
queen just
nope.
cut him off because he was saying bad stuff about her. No, but we even had some early problems with that. Oh, hello. I can hear myself.
Sorry.
We even had some early problems with that when we first pitched the idea to some publishers. We talked about some feedback from outside the team in the early days, even before the demo. We encountered an issue with from the very beginning that this is just a timer, and that some people even today, when they buy the game on Steam and play it like they would a normal city builder, they still feel like this is the expectation. They want to play a longer game. They don't want to be rushed. But that's a moment where I think we managed to create, as Michael said, a more of a resource out of it. Like it's decreased because you gain reputation. You have some perks that play off of that. Sometimes you even want more impatience because it lowers the hostility of the forest and so on. So it's now more of a mechanic than just a timer. But even to this day, there's some people who don't really like that. But that's, I think, something that we want to really address because the game has an identity right now. It's a roguelite city builder. So that's one of the elements, and some pressure there. There has to be some pressure, basically. But sorry, I just further content because you dropped.
No, you're doing great. The only thing I would add is that we quickly noticed that on the other hand, we also, like, there is a negative thing that is like controlling how long can you play, but also there is a positive thing. Like when you're doing great, when every species is very happy, the game also is done, like it's completed very quickly, like a minute or two, and it's gone. And it's also very like intentional decision, because we don't want the player to be satisfied for too long. It's like playing, like it's very, I would say, normal in roguelites. Like if you're having a perfect build in Risk of Rain, you're just gonna absolutely demolish every boss that you encounter and win the game even faster than you would do normally. And that's great, but the game cannot give you too much with this power fantasy. Otherwise, you will just get bored with a regular game. It's like a very thin ice, I would say. We need to step on as roguelite designers. So it's like controlled on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's nice everything comes back to this kind of variability in roguelites of, things can go really well, things can go really poorly, and that gives it that freshness. Yeah, I know we're coming up close on the end of time already. I will end on, I think, a question that can be a lot of fun, especially for these kind of swingy games of just like, are there any particular favorite fun stories you've had, either, seeing people achieve combinations in the game you didn't expect, or if when you were testing things you had an idea that when you went into it created some situation that was unexpected, like some favorite moments.
I mean, we routinely get screenshots from players when they like break a record in resource gathering, because that's one of the measures of success in City Builder, where you can I mean, basically your economy is your like power measure in the game a bit. So we routinely get some screenshots where somebody has like 50,000 meat, and there are some perks they use to get to that, because we have some perks that the more you produce, the more you gain in the next production cycle. Plus you get meat when somebody dies, plus you get a perk that doesn't increase the queen's impatience, because normally the queen's impatience grows when somebody dies in your village. So they have a perk that disables that gives them meat if somebody dies. They specifically trigger some like events, hostile events, just to like starve or kill people off and just gather more resources. But I can't think of anything more crazy than that lately. I don't know if you, Michael, have any.
There was this one thing we had an event called Living Matter, and it was an event that was slowly chewing through your food, but and if you wouldn't solve it, it would like duplicate and stay on the map. So now we have 2, and they will duplicate to 4. And we thought like, hey, it's a great event. Well, if you want to solve it, and it had some really good rewards, like you could, and they were random, so you could farm it. But you had to be like very careful, right? If you like, our idea was that, you can farm it, right? You can have like 2 or 4 of them, but if you forget about them or you won't have resources to fix them, everything will spiral out of control and destroy your village, right? Wonderful design, great idea. But the players, of course, found a way to stop it, and they were building like those small fences around 4 of them. So and they were like creating a small farm fields of living matter, just because we wanted to be cool, and the event was avoiding any buildings or structures, so not to destroy anything. And the players were using it to farm the living matter for like the entirety of the game.
Yeah, because you could basically just enclose it in a small fence. The game would then say, okay, I don't have space to duplicate, so I'm going to stay here. And they just use that to create like an enclosure for the living matter. Yeah.
Now, did you just decide to leave it that way and you're like, good job? Or did you
No.
it's a fix that was a little too
It destroys
much?
buildings now.
Yeah, we were nasty.
I love, only in roguelikes can you get away with having those exponential, every time you do this happens, and the loops. But yeah, they can go too far. But, well, excellent. I know we gave a little bit of extra time because we started late, but we should let you go. Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to have you here. Like I said, it's great when we can have people from the other side of the ocean, and I'm excited, for more people, hopefully in the roguelite community, if they didn't already know about Against the Storm, to try it out, because I think that the roguelite city builder concept just works so well. And it's great to see the game keeps changing so quickly that there's always new stuff to check out.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll keep updating the game. Probably this year, at the end of the year, it's going to be out of early access. So it's going to be a bit less chaotic balance-wise. You don't have to relearn it every 2 weeks, maybe. We'll see about that. It's going to be fun. Yeah. Thank you very much for the talk.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, it was great talking with you.
Cool. I'm glad. Well, good luck with the early access release, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you for a bit of the main event. And yeah, thank you so much for coming to the event.
Yeah.
Thank you.